A former domestic helper is now a free woman, just days after she was cleared of stealing from the Changi Airport Group chairman and his family.
Falling from last year's record high, Temasek's one-year return for shareholders turns negative for the first time since 2016.
And Apple is all set to open its new store in Marina Bay Sands, but visits are by appointment only.
It's 5:30 p.m. here in Singapore. You're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Haryanto Diman.
And I'm Dylan Ang. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
A former domestic worker has been cleared of all criminal charges 4 days after she was acquitted of stealing from the family of Changi Airport Group chairman Liew Mun Leong. Ms. Parti Liyani was today granted a discharge amounting to an acquittal for the 5th charge for fraudulent possession of property. This after prosecutors applied for the charge to be withdrawn.
The charge related to 18 items in her possession not linked to the Liew family that she was suspected to have fraudulently obtained and for which she was accused of failing to give a satisfactory account of how she came to obtain them. According to the charge sheet, the items were of unknown value.
Home Affairs and Law Minister K. Shanmugam is the most senior government official who has spoken out about the case. He said the authorities will deal with what had gone wrong in the process of investigations and cautioned against prejudging what part of the process had gone wrong. The public should wait for the outcome of the reviews, said Mr. Shanmugam.
In the process, we should not be defensive, but it should also not be a witch hunt. It's got to be a fair process. We have to find out what happened and why it happened and then deal with it and be accountable. That's the best way to build trust in public, in the system. And so come out in public and say what steps we have taken once the reviews are done.
When asked if the class and status differences between the domestic worker and CAG chairman Mr. Liew Mun Leong and his family had contributed to unfairness in the judicial process, Mr. Shanmugam said it's good to see justice delivered based on the High Court's judgment. However, he stressed that the justice system is impartial to all and fair, and the status and position of the parties involved do not matter.
She was charged in a criminal case based on a complaint by the business person. The judge's judgment goes through the facts very carefully. It sets out what the break in the chain of evidence is. And in that way, it's good to see that justice is both blind and justice has been delivered.
Meanwhile, Temasek said today that Mr. Liew Mun Leong, who is its senior international business advisor, has contributed to Singapore and its people, and his track record at various firms attests to that. This was in response to questions from the Straits Times at a virtual media conference on Temasek's performance on whether Mr. Liew's actions in the acquitted maid case go against the company's values and if Temasek would be looking into the issue.
Its chief executive Dilhan Pillay Sandrasegara added he would not comment further, citing ongoing proceedings on the case. However, he said, quote, "I think we should hear from Mr. Liew on his side of the issue and not come quick to judgment until we've heard all sides of things." An update on the COVID-19 situation here. 47 new cases were confirmed today, taking the total count in Singapore to 57,091.
There were no new community cases, but today's cases included one imported case who had been placed on stay-home notice upon arrival in Singapore. More details will be released tonight.
COVID-19 has severely affected many companies. Employment expectations among businesses in Singapore have taken a turn for the worse, while the overall business sentiment remains negative. This according to the Singapore Commercial Credit Bureau's latest quarterly survey of 200 business owners and senior executives. The indicator for employment expectations in the fourth quarter declined to negative 13.19 percentage points, the lowest level this year.
It's in contrast to the third quarter, when employment sentiment had improved to negative 3.29 percentage points from negative 4.98 percentage points in the second quarter. SECB said the weakened employment sentiment is largely due to a tepid outlook in global economic activities, which has impacted firms in external-oriented sectors, in particular the financial, manufacturing and transport sectors. Firms are also turning towards hiring digitally savvy talent and investing in technology in a bid to digitalize and keep manpower costs low during this time.
Labour experts also told the Straits Times that tens of thousands of jobs here are expected to be cut within the next half a year, when the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will be felt. They added workers have so far been sheltered from the worst economic effects due to substantial government support.
Here to discuss this further is David Leong. Now, he's the Managing Director of HR firm PeopleWorldwide Consulting. Hi, David. So nice to see you again. Now, it's been about 4 months since you were on the show. Is the current employment situation what you expected?
4 months ago, when we spoke, that was the inception point. And today, the job situation is quite bad right now. It's deteriorated quite a fair bit. So we expect a bit more unemployment to be going on. Typically, in the Q4 of each year, we will see down cycle. And in addition to this down cycle, meaning to say people typically will not be hiring in Q4 of the year because we are coming close to the end of the year. Now, with the COVID in full force right now, companies will not be looking up to hire. Instead, I think because of the business sentiment, employees are looking to restructure the organization. So going forward, in the month of October to November, we'll be likely to see a bit more retrenchment going on. So I think the tsunami of job losses have to be expected.
Now, the government has been encouraging firms to hire local workers, especially with the recent move to raise the qualifying minimum salaries for EP and S-Pass holders. But some firms may still choose to hire foreigners. Now, David, what can locals do to make themselves more attractive to companies than their foreign counterparts?
This hiring of the foreigners, the EPs and the S-Passes, have been fiercely debated in Parliament. And we have seen both sides of the story, but on the ground, I think a few things needs to be elaborated. For the S-Passes, when it was first started, it was supposed to be for the semi-skilled workers. They are actually a layer between the work permit and the EP. So when S-Passes were introduced, they were sub $2,000 salary, and over time, it has increased to the current 2004, 2005. At this salary range, typically what would happen is the PMETs are challenged because the S-Passes workers from overseas, when they land themselves in Singapore, they are doing jobs that many PMETs can do, but except the wage gap, it's low. So they start with a lower wage point, which means to say that they are challenging and competing with the PMET at that level. Now, in a better economic situation, nobody will fight with the S-Pass for those roles. Those roles are necessary roles, but Singaporeans do not want to do those function and jobs for 3 reasons. Some of these roles are dangerous, dirty, or difficult. So in good economic cycle, Singaporean will not want to participate or join the company for such roles. So it was during economic boom that we have shortages of such foreigners. MOM introduced S-Pass to bring in this group of semi-skilled level at the supervisory to managerial role to fill the void. Now, when times are bad, now we are in a bad cycle, in a down cycle. We have to relook at this and see how we can redeploy Singaporean for some of this position. So S-Pass and EP has to be relooked at to see how we can restructure jobs to fill in Singaporean first, and then we bring in the foreigners to complement, not to substitute Singaporeans as a whole.
Now, David, in downturns like this, people have to adapt and pivot, especially if the industry is badly hit. Now, one group may want to remain in the same industry, while another group is, say, open to switching to a different industry. Now, what's your advice for these two groups when it comes to upskilling, reskilling, and generally keeping their jobs secure?
I think the part about reskilling, upskilling is necessary because a lot of jobs are lost, and some of these jobs will be lost quite permanently. I think for job seekers, we should not be concerned about the industry. For so long as there are a job that's available, there are things like cross-functional skills. A sales job in say, a semicon industry to a pharmaceutical industry should be about the same, because you still use the same inherent skill set that you have, your sales skill set, to do the same job. So as far as I'm concerned, and as what I've advised some of my clients, it is good for us to open up our mind and consider the different industries, because industries are evolving as well. Even within the same industry, they have jobs that are no longer around. So it is good for job seekers to consider to go over to another industry to explore.
Well, thank you so much, David, for the advice and definitely the insights as well, and also for setting aside time to speak with us again. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Now, we're speaking to the Managing Director of HR firm PeopleWorldwide Consulting, David Leong.
State investor Temasek Holdings today announced its review of the financial year. It acknowledged the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has on some of its figures, with its net portfolio value and total shareholder return dropping from previous years.
The company also shared details of its contribution to the fight against the coronavirus, as well as its commitment to reducing carbon emissions. Multimedia journalist Chow Suen with more.
Temasek revealed that its net portfolio value this year has seen a drop to $306 billion, down from $313 billion last year. And it saw a negative total stakeholder return of minus 2.28 in 2020. As its investment in the hard-hit sectors of tourism, travel and entertainment remains small, at about 5%, it has not been hit as hard by the contraction in these industries. Speaking today, Temasek executives emphasized its commitment to helping fight the COVID-19 pandemic. From masks, swabs and hand sanitizers to investing in the development of a vaccine, dipping into funds set aside since the 2003 SARS epidemic for community-based activities. Temasek had earlier pledged $800 million to the cause. Temasek's executives and staff discussed some of the actions and considerations the company took.
We brought together the weight of our capabilities, our networks, our resources, and our people to this pandemic to take it to the ground, both here in Singapore and elsewhere.
Cases were accelerating, and there needed to be a way to help alleviate the growing pressure on the hospitals so that hospitals can continue to take more acute cases. So what led us to the expo was the fact that we were looking for a relatively large space that could house lots of patients. And it was also operated by one of our portfolio companies.
The company also committed to the ambitious goal of a net zero carbon emissions by 2050, both by working with its portfolio companies to reduce their emissions, as well as investing in research and technology. All in all, Temasek said that while it has seen the impact of the COVID-19 quite acutely, it remains positive, looking into ways to grow in the future. The company also stressed that despite market turmoil, Singapore and China remain its top two countries by concentration, with a majority of portfolio companies anchored in Asia. Chow Suen for the Straits Times.
Associate Editor at the Straits Times, Vikram Khanna, joins us now to break down this review. Vikram, what were some of the significant investments that Temasek made in the past financial year?
Well, Temasek seems to be investing in structural themes and trends that will produce growth in the future over the long term. So I obviously don't have the whole portfolio, but from what has been revealed, we can see, I'll give you some examples. In the area of financial services, for example, they have invested in PayPal, in MasterCard, and in Visa, which are major beneficiaries of the shift to digital payments, right? And also in the payments stroke e-commerce space, they've invested in a Singapore startup called Shopback, which enables consumers to get cash back from purchases that they make in big stores. So that's in the financial services e-commerce space. In sustainable energy, that's another big area of investment for them. They've invested in a Singapore company called SeAP, SEAP. It's a solar power producer in Singapore. They've also invested in a Danish company called Haldor Topsoe, which is apparently a global leader in carbon reduction technology. So there's a lot of emphasis in their investments on low carbon companies and low carbon technologies. Then there's another area that seems to be of great interest to them, which is sustainable food. Okay, so they made this investment in this American company called Perfect Day, which makes plant-based proteins, things like burgers, sushi, satay, but all made from plants and allegedly taste like the real thing. I haven't tried it, but that's the claim anyway. And there's also another company called Impossible Foods, which is famous for its soy-based burgers, right? Yeah. Which is all the rage in the US at the moment. In the area of biomedical, they've invested in a company called Benevolent AI, which uses AI for innovative drug development. Okay, so this company also develops personalized drugs for patients using AI. So in general, I would say a lot of these companies, some of them are unlisted, and many of them are at relatively early stages of development. So they could have a long runway and a big payoff down the road.
Now, Vikram, let's shift gears. Temasek's China assets outweigh its Singapore assets. Do you think it's the start of a trend that Temasek will invest more in China?
Well, yes. China's investments in China make up about 29% of Temasek's portfolio, which is the single largest allocation by country. Now, of course, China will continue to be a major player in the global economy, and China has companies that are very active in the areas Temasek is interested in, for example, in tech, in AI, in e-commerce, in sustainable energy, and so on, right? But I guess Temasek also must be mindful of the risks of continuing to make large investments in China. There's the US-China trade war. There's a possibility of the fragmentation of technologies, the splinter net, as they call it. There's also economic slowdown in China in the future. There's also corporate governance risks. There's an aging demographic. I'm sure Temasek has taken cognizance of all these risks. And so on balance, I expect that the investment in China will remain very substantial, but whether it will remain proportionately the largest in Temasek's portfolio remains to be seen.
Right. Vikram, how has COVID-19 impacted Temasek's business? We talk about, impact of COVID-19 on businesses and firms. And what should a man on the street take away from this review?
Okay, COVID-19 obviously has had a big effect on the return of the portfolio in the last year, especially towards the tail end of the last year. So there's been a minus 2.3% return as of March 31st. But you got to see this in context, right? Because the markets bottomed in the last week of March, about the 23rd of March. And then after that, they went up considerably. So if you look at the portfolio today, the value of the portfolio today, it's probably considerably higher than it was on March 31st. So COVID obviously has had a big impact, especially towards the last month of the financial year. But and I believe COVID also delayed the release of Temasek's results, which were normally due in July, but because of COVID, companies couldn't release their results on time, and so the whole thing was delayed till now. What this person on the street should take away, I guess one important thing to take away is that Temasek is a long-term investor. So you can't look at 1 year. They've had difficult years in the past. The Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis, the dot-com bust, SARS. they've always been one-year dips, and this is another case of a one-year dip.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Vikram. That was Associate Editor Vikram Khanna.
Welcome. Thank you.
In other local headlines, Apple has unveiled its world first floating spherical store at Marina Bay Sands in a media preview today ahead of the official opening on Thursday. Spread across 3 levels, the interior of the dome holds the forum, an events space centered on a video wall which will serve as a stage for Apple's in-store events featuring Singapore's artists, musicians and creators. The MBS store also has an underwater boardroom at its basement level for entrepreneurs and developers to receive training and advice. The third store after Orchard Road and Jewel Changi Airport will open to the public on Thursday, September 10th from 10 a.m. with safe management measures in place. Visits to the store will be by appointment only through its website. From Friday, walk-ins will be allowed. The new satellite-based electronic road pricing system will start in the middle of 2023, but plans to charge motorists for the distances they clock will be on hold. The Land Transport Authority said today that installation of a new onboard unit to replace the current in-vehicle unit will start in the second half of next year and will take place over 18 months. The initial unit will be free of charge. The new OBU is compatible with the current ERP systems and car parks, and motorists can continue to use NET's FlashPay and EasyLink cards or credit or debit cards to make payment.
Work has begun on Singapore's first integrated water and solid waste treatment facility in Tuas, comprising 2 mega facilities managed separately by National Water Agency PUB and the National Environment Agency. Tuas Nexus will locate PUB's Tuas Water Reclamation Plant next to NEA's integrated waste management facility. The Tuas Water Reclamation Plant is a key component of Phase 2 of the Deep Tunnel Sewerage System, which will convey used water from the western part of Singapore to the Tuas plant for treatment. Meanwhile, NEA's facility is set to become Singapore's largest waste incineration plant and its most energy-efficient one yet upon completion. Yishun residents can look forward to a new integrated development at Chong Pang City that will have fitness facilities as well as an upgraded hawker centre and community club. Tentatively called Chill at Chong Pang, the multi-storey development is slated to be completed in 2027 and will be located at the site of Chong Pang CC. It will also have space for commercial shops. Meanwhile, the existing hawker centre at Chong Pang Market and Food Centre, when vacated, will be redeveloped into a community plaza by 2028. Also making headlines around the world, Johor wants the Malaysian government to speed up the full reopening of its border with Singapore. The state's Menteri Besar said that since the COVID-19 pandemic began, more than 35,000 Johor residents working in Singapore have lost their jobs, not to mention around 250,000 affected Malaysians who travel to Singapore daily. The border reopening also contributes 50% of the customs revenue to Malaysia.
According to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, Australian media firms rushed 2 of their China-based reporters from the country after Chinese police demanded interviews with both journalists. An ABC correspondent in Beijing and the Australian Financial Review correspondent in Shanghai boarded a flight to Sydney last night, following negotiations between the diplomats and Chinese officials. The incident came amid worsening diplomatic relations between the 2 governments and followed the detention of Cheng Lei last month, who's an Australian working as a business news anchor for CGTN.
Disney's live-action remake of Mulan has drawn a fresh wave of criticism for being filmed partly in Xinjiang, the region in China where Uyghur Muslims have been detained in mass internment camps. The new film has become a magnet for anger over the Chinese Communist Party's policies, promoting nationalism and ethnic Han chauvinism. The film has also faced months of calls for a boycott by supporters of the Hong Kong anti-government protests after the movie star Liu Yifei said she backed the city's police.
And in tennis, men's world number 1 Novak Djokovic called for compassion for the line judge he accidentally struck in the throat with a ball at the US Open yesterday. This as several of his fans took to social media to hurl abuse at her after her Instagram username was carried by Serbian media. And the women's top-ranked player, Ashley Barty, won't be defending her French Open title later this month. Her decision to not travel to Europe is in part because of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as her lack of preparedness to play at Roland Garros.
And those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Dylan Ang. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.